The dichotomy of control. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a vast ocean, watching waves roll endlessly toward the shore. Each wave carries with it fragments of distant storms, currents you'll never see, and forces that began their journey thousands of miles away. Yet here you stand, unable to command even the smallest ripple, while simultaneously holding the power to decide whether you'll step forward into the water or turn and walk away. In this moment, you encounter one of the most profound paradoxes of human existence: the strange truth that you are simultaneously powerless over most of what happens to you and completely sovereign over the one thing that matters most. The ancient Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, and it presents us with a puzzle that seems almost absurd. On one side, you have absolutely no control over the weather, other people's decisions, the past, the future, illness, natural disasters, or even your own eventual death. On the other side, you have complete control over something so subtle and internal that most people spend their entire lives without fully recognizing it. This invisible realm of absolute personal sovereignty exists in the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. The paradox deepens when you realize that focusing entirely on this tiny sphere of control might actually give you more practical influence over your life than frantically grasping at all the external things you cannot control. Consider how this plays out in your daily experience. You wake up and immediately encounter a dozen things beyond your control: the traffic on your commute, your colleague's mood, whether it rains, if your computer decides to update itself at an inconvenient moment. Your natural impulse might be to feel frustrated by these disruptions, as if your emotional energy could somehow bend them to your will. Yet the Stoic insight reveals something curious. The person who fully accepts their lack of control over these external events often finds themselves more capable of navigating them skillfully. By releasing the futile effort to control the uncontrollable, you free up mental and emotional resources to focus on what you actually can influence. But what exactly falls within your control? The answer is both smaller and larger than you might expect. You cannot control your initial emotional reaction to events, the thoughts that spontaneously arise in your mind, or even many of your habitual behavioral responses. These emerge from depths of conditioning and biology that operate far below the threshold of conscious choice. What you can control is subtler: the attention you give to certain thoughts over others, the values you choose to prioritize when making decisions, the effort you put into developing your character, and most fundamentally, the stance you take toward whatever life presents to you. This creates an interesting paradox within the paradox. The more clearly you see how limited your control actually is, the more empowered you become. It's like discovering that you've been trying to steer a ship by shouting at the ocean, when all along there was a small but responsive rudder at your fingertips. The rudder cannot control the waves, the wind, or the weather, but it can determine how your vessel moves through whatever conditions arise. When you stop exhausting yourself trying to command the storms, you can focus on becoming skillful with the one tool that actually responds to your touch. There's something almost mystical about how this principle transforms daily experience. You begin to notice that the moments of greatest suffering often occur when you're unconsciously fighting against things you cannot change. The traffic jam becomes unbearable not because of the delay itself, but because part of you believes your frustration should be able to dissolve the gridlock. The difficult person in your life causes anguish not merely through their actions, but because you're expending energy trying to mentally control their behavior. When you truly internalize the dichotomy of control, these struggles begin to feel as futile as arguing with gravity. Yet this recognition does not lead to passivity or resignation. Instead, it reveals a more intelligent way of engaging with life. You cannot control whether you get sick, but you can control how conscientiously you care for your health. You cannot control whether others appreciate your work, but you can control the integrity and effort you bring to your tasks. You cannot control whether someone loves you back, but you can control whether you love them freely, without attachment to a particular outcome. This shift from trying to control results to focusing on controlling your input often leads, paradoxically, to better results. The deepest layer of this paradox touches something profound about human nature itself. We are creatures who desperately want to feel safe and in control, yet we inhabit a universe that is fundamentally uncertain and uncontrollable. The dichotomy of control suggests that true security comes not from successfully controlling external circumstances, but from developing an unshakable relationship with uncertainty itself. When you know that you cannot control most of what happens, but you trust completely in your ability to work with whatever arises, you become oddly invulnerable. External events may still affect you, but they cannot destabilize you in the same way. This creates a curious form of freedom. Most people live with a low-level background anxiety about all the things that could go wrong, all the variables they need to manage, all the people and circumstances they need to influence to feel secure. But when you fully embrace the dichotomy of control, much of this anxiety simply becomes irrelevant. You stop carrying the impossible burden of trying to micromanage reality. Instead, you can focus your energy on the much smaller but entirely achievable task of managing your own responses, choices, and character development. There's a gentle irony in discovering that acceptance of powerlessness can feel so empowering. It's like learning that the door you've been pushing against for years opens easily when you pull instead. The relief comes not from gaining more control, but from releasing the exhausting effort to control what was never yours to control in the first place. In that release, you find space to breathe, to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, to focus on what you can actually do rather than worrying about what you cannot. As you settle into this understanding, you might notice how it changes the quality of your attention. Instead of scattering your mental energy across dozens of uncontrollable variables, you can gather it into the present moment, where your actual sphere of influence resides. Instead of rehearsing anxious scenarios about futures you cannot guarantee, you can focus on making choices right now that align with your deepest values. Instead of replaying frustrations about other people's decisions, you can attend to your own decision-making process. The dichotomy of control is not really about solving the problem of uncertainty. It's about discovering a different relationship with uncertainty, one that allows you to remain grounded and responsive even when you cannot predict or control what comes next. It's about noticing that the peace you've been seeking through control was always available through acceptance, and that the influence you've been trying to exert on the world often flows more naturally when you focus first on influencing yourself.